for hosting us here at Highfields Fire Station, as we've held previous full authority meetings previously. Thanks to all the members here and the officers present. I'm going to move straight into our formal agenda. So the first item on our agenda is apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Jonathan Wheeler and Councillor Richard Butler is here to substitute. You're very welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Good to see you. And we also have apologies from Civil Fielding, and we've got Councillor Gulkhan substituting. You're very welcome, Gul. Good to see you.
Thank you. Yes. You don't look.
And I think that's everybody. Yeah. Otherwise, everybody else is here. Item 2 then is, also remiss of me, I should say, at the outset, a huge welcome to Mark Kimberley, who is acting as our interim treasurer to the Fire Authority and 151 representative and officer for the interim until our new permanent person comes into post. Mark, I know you've done this before, and you and I have worked together before as well at Gavin, and you're doing a fantastic job for us, and you're very, very welcome.
Thank you. Very welcome.
So item 2 then on the agenda is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest by any members or officers? I'm not seeing any indications. Item 3 then is our minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of April for confirmation, which are on the yellow pages in the pack. Are there any comments or questions in relation to the minutes that people would like to raise? Colleagues happy to approve those as a correct record?
Yes,
They agree?
agreed.
Thank you. Item 4 then is the local firefighter pension annual report for 2022-23, which is on page 9 to 26 in the agenda, and the Chief Fire Officer is going to introduce this. Craig.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And members, please be gentle with me. This is normally your scheme manager, which is your head of finance and treasurer, delegated role, that would normally present this report to you. I will keep it as brief as I can, so we don't confuse things. There's lots of information in the report, as there is annually. If there are any questions after it, in terms of technical questions or throughout, we've got Nick here from HR, from the HR perspective, who can help us with some of that technical understanding, because that's a large part of his role and has been for quite some time now. And obviously we've got Mark and Tracy around some of the financial implications should they arise. Local pension board then has been in place really since 2015. There is a little bit in there as well. We have tried previously to do a regional local pension board across the three, and that went to Secretary of State previously, but that had got to go back for reconsideration because of some of the changes. But it continues. The pension board is represented both by employees, and that is generally from the trade unions, the Fire Brigade Union predominantly, and other trade unions, and employers, and that's really represented by a principal officer in the main, and of course elected members as part of the employers side of the local pension board to make sure that gives that balance. And the chair of that board is rotated from employer and employee representative periodically. The format of the meetings and the board membership is laid down in section 2. Hopefully that's clear for members. And also there is a requirement to do some training to make sure that people who are on that board can actually understand what it is, the role that they're actually fulfilling. And the pensions regulator keeps kind of an eye on that, and there are sort of training syllabus available on the pension regulator's website as well that people can register and actually do. Board activity 2.9 and 2.10 just talks about some of the things that I've just covered there as well. If I move on to 2.11, current pension issues, there's predominantly two main things that are ongoing. And I suppose I can't stress enough that the kind of industry that's been created by basically challenges from employees, representatives, Fire Brigade Union nationally, around some of the discrimination that the new pension regulations actually brought in. And of course, they've won those discrimination claims. And that now means, of course, that fire authorities nationally have got to kind of work through and unravel what that means. And again, we'll go through. So 2.12 talks about the first one, really, which was McLeod, around discrimination. And the Fire Brigade Union brought some test cases, and Nottinghamshire were named in those test cases, not because we had something of a particular issue, it was just those were the test cases that were being taken forward. There was a whole raft of other people that were affected as scheme members that would have been included in terms of the discrimination, and that's included in 2.13. Alongside that, of course, as well, there was a memorandum of understanding about how the settlement or remediation would be taken place, and there was some guidance that was issued predominantly through government. Unfortunately, that guidance, as we were working through that, was withdrawn, and then there's had to be further work done around the actual guidance that's in place for fire authorities to work through in terms of the remediations. And that information has now come through and is effective from October previously of this year. You'll see in 2.16, just to highlight, there was some risk associated with basically dealing with scheme members currently or were about to retire or had retired in a particular period where the discrimination applied, and they were category 2 and category 1 and category 2. And the previous scheme manager brought a report to Policy and Strategy Committee to consider how we felt was the best way in terms of the financial and reputational risk about how we would deal with that. And it was agreed we would continue with category 1 resolutions in terms of making sure people got the pension that they were actually entitled to. And again, that takes a lot of work about when did the scheme member leave, what were they entitled to, what scheme were they in, what choice they would have made as well, if they would have stayed in a previous pension scheme or the 2015 scheme, because of course all now members have been moved to the 2015 scheme as of April 2022. So everybody is now in the scheme, so everybody is affected in the same way. So Policy and Strategy Committee agreed on April of 22 to carry on actually making sure the pension members got the pensions that they were entitled to. Moving further down then, of course, onto 2.20, we work with West Yorkshire Pension Fund. They are your scheme administrators and where all scheme members would go to for queries around their pensions, where they were coming up for retirement, for example, about asking what pension they would be entitled to, so they can effectively make some decisions about on their retirement deadline, or what choices they would make. So, for example, if somebody was moved from the 1992 scheme to the 2015 scheme or about to retire, they'd be provided with figures about is it better to go back into the 92 scheme for the period that they were in it or remain in the 2015 scheme. And you can imagine that that's West Yorkshire Pension Fund, I think, administers something like 18 or 20 fire authorities now. There's very few little choice, but we get a great service. We were previously with Leicestershire County Council. So that work is kind of ongoing. There has been some money provided as well by government, and we now use that for pensions administration because the amount of work that's been generated. We got a grant actually, and we've employed somebody to do that administrative side to assist us with the work. If you look in 2.22 as well, there's a little bit there as well, is that because of the legal challenges, and this piece is still ongoing, there's a claim for hurt feelings for all scheme members that have been affected by the last sort of decade of changes to the pension scheme. And again, it just breaks down there is that a general rule is going to be about £3,700 for a scheme member who has been affected by it, or where somebody can show particular circumstances. So some people may have claimed, well, I would not have retired if I'd have known, or I would have retired, and this is the issue it has caused me particularly. So they'll have to provide evidence really about their particular circumstances. And that could go back many years really in terms of how people are affected. So again, you can hopefully see the amount of work that's created by that. Moving on to the next one then in terms of particular is the Matthews and O'Brien scheme relating to really on-call or retained firefighters. And this is about the discrimination about not being able to access certain pension funds through a certain period. So when the 2006 scheme was brought in, for example, who did it apply to and when did it apply to? And it's been proven as well that that was discriminatory in terms of the application of that as well. Lots of issues there obviously around on-call but part-time workers and everything else. And that is also being worked through in terms of memorandums of understanding. There is a reality as well. We don't think that the future claims are ended yet. There are some that will go back numbers of years. And in the report it does talk about we could be going back many, many years, and electronic records are not available for some people that will have worked for us, would have been entitled to a pension that we just don't know about, because we started in, I think, with Nottinghamshire County Council as our pension administrator. We moved paper records to electronic records when we moved to Leicestershire, and I'll be corrected by my colleagues if I'm wrong here, but I'm going off my own memories. We did a data cleansing exercise and an accuracy check, and we tried to work through some issues. Then, of course, now that's a number of years ago. We don't keep those paper records. It's even things like, do we have information on stations and photos on stations of people that may have been entitled to a pension scheme? So you can see it's quite a complicated piece of work for a relatively small organisation. That will be working its way through, and hopefully we'll get to a point really where over the next, I guess hopefully the next year or so, that will be dealt with. There has recently been a national, through the LGA and through the Scheme Advisor, so Scheme Advisory Board, that we contribute to, that's detailed in there, where you pay a levy to basically. So the Scheme Advisory Board nationally on your behalf issues guidance so that fire authorities work to the same consistent guidance. In terms of scheme manager activity, you can kind of see there, and as I say, when we get, it was Becky Smathers previously was your scheme manager, the authority is the scheme manager, but that's delegated to the head of finance and treasurer under your constitution. And there are audits done in there to give you some assurance as well. So between the scheme manager and our human resources team, they basically work on the process of making sure people get their pensions they're entitled to. In terms of financial risks in section 3, you'll see there in 3.1 on the bottom line, you've got an earmark reserve of 200k to cover any cost that might come up. And there's also the issue around the temporary fund that I talked about, the 125k that came from Home Office, to make sure that actually this new burden, because the discrimination wasn't generated by fire authorities, it was generated by the application of pensions regulations nationally to the sector, which wasn't at the behest really of the employer. And we've just actually had the fallout of that. But we were given a grant of 125k to assist with that new burden. And a little bit I talked on there as well in 3.3 about Scheme Advisory Board. I have to say Scheme Advisory Board, in particular the pensions advice we get from the central team because of the work that they do, has been absolutely invaluable really. And you can see there in terms of the cost, £3,700 for 22-23, and I think we've just recently had notification of what the levy will be for next year, but I don't have that figure in to hand at the moment. The interesting or the more important one I draw members to, not just because of the quantum of the figure is 3.4, you'll see there that the 2016 valuation of the pension scheme, we got increased costs to the employer of 2.5 million annually, which we attracted 2.3 million pounds of subsidised grant from government. And at the bottom line, there remains some uncertainty because that goes up to 2026 as far as we know. So, for example, if that grant wasn't there, the fire authority would have a £2.5 million hole to find in its own budgets. And I'm sure that that will become clear over the coming months and years as we head towards 2026 about how that will be continued or what the proposed resolution will be. And that's kind of all I kind of wanted to cover there, Chair. There's quite a large appendix attached for members around the governance arrangements to give you some assurance. But of course, you have one of your members on there and one of your members who was a substitute on there as well.
Thank you, Craig. Councillor Hollis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Craig, for the report. I just intend to give you lots of detailed financial questions now, which I know you can have right off the end of your finger. But the question I just want to ask briefly relates to Appendix C. I think just to make sure I've got the understanding of this correct. I'll use page 26. Obviously, I've sat on the pension board for a term or two now at the County Council, up until recently. I understand from questions I've asked before, and this is a completely different process, because obviously you won't be in the dark about, obviously some of our employees do use that scheme. I'm very uncomfortable with the way they invest the cash and do the investments. I think it's ethically wrong for a scheme that you have no choice but to pay into. If it's a private pension scheme, as far as I'm concerned, if you pay your money into that scheme, you accept what they invest in. It's different with public pension schemes, like the one the Fire Authority do. But this isn't like that. I understand that we don't hold the money for that long where we do the investments. So just some reassurance of that, and what happens to the money in the short term, in the brief time that we do hold it, what do we do with it, would be the first question. And then the second question would be, to make sure I've understood it right, the government are actually shortchanging us with regards to the pension, and we're topping it up from our own money to the tune of 2.463 every year. Well, that was this year's figure. I just want to make sure I've got that correct. So the money that we have to pay out compared to the money that they calculate that we have to pay out, there's a substantial difference between it, and that ultimately comes out of our day-to-day costs, which in theory we could use to employ more firefighters if we didn't have to pay for pensions.
Yeah.
In theory.
Yeah. I suppose on the finances, I'll leave that in terms of to Tracy. My understanding is it's a national pot. We don't really hold the money; it goes straight into a national pot. So it's not. We don't do anything with that money. We can't. The pension board has no say really over the scheme or how it uses the money or otherwise. So it's even more limited than the LGPS, for example, in terms of how. I'm not sure it's even in a scheme that gets invested or otherwise nationally, but I don't know if Mark or Tracy can add anything to that really.
I know a little bit more how the police scheme works, and I sit on the national body for the scheme advisory board for that. But in essence, it's a zero-sum game, isn't it? The money comes in and comes back out. So you see that. I assume you'll get a pension grant of that amount to compensate for it. So there is no net cost to it. So if it worked in a different way, it would be a zero-sum game. There are some costs. And again, I'm assuming your scheme was the same as the police scheme, is where we've taken some very local decisions to for health or early retirement, where those costs are borne locally.
Yeah.
If I could just come back on that, just a very brief, so intricate point. Page 26, top-up grant received from the government
Yep.
is considerably different to the money that actually we're payable. What's the figure at the bottom then? That's the money that we pay directly from the authority to top it up ourselves. Have I got that correct or wrong?
Are you referring to the 2.4?
Correct.
That's the top-up grant that comes in July.
In July.
Yeah.
So that's not coming out of our...
No, that's coming in to pay for the deficit,
Yeah.
effectively.
Okay. So why is that separated from the figure above? And I'm sorry for the detailed question, but why is that separated from the money we've received above that from the central government then?
That's just showing the top-up grant that we get to fund the whole of the pension scheme.
Okay.
So they'll pay a base amount of money in there. I think you'll do a return at the end of the year and look at what's actually gone out. The difference you'll claim back. So it's a timing issue really.
Okay.
So if anything, you may have a little bit of a cash flow cost within your workforce, but then I can counter that because obviously they pay grants in advance as well. So you've got some gains there. Essentially, there may be minor variations between the two, depending on local decisions and cash flow. But essentially, it's a zero sum.
So the simple quick question is exactly what you said. It's a zero sum. We get the money in nationally, and we just simply administer it and pay it to the local scheme members.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, Tom, that we've got no say over amount. We do have local discretions in terms of like ill health, as Mark just said. I think the bit in terms of financial risk in 3.4, that top grant comes in, has not moved, so the 2.3 has not really moved. So as we've grown on, the gap between what that top up is and what we have to find has increased annually. And that's the bit in terms of where I look at as cost.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Richard?
Thank you. Pensions are complicated at the best of times, aren't they? But my word, yes, what a difficult one this is. But just a query, really, procedural more than anything. On 2.22, where you did touch on this, the extra payments or the payments made for injury to feelings, etc. How is that all defined then? If someone comes along and says that I need to make a claim, is it a long process that has to go to some sort of hearing and expense and all the rest of it, or is our administrator covering that as well?
Yeah, the settlement's been done nationally with the trade unions.
Well,
so
right.
They've arrived through discussion and negotiation what they believe is a figure that's a set figure. So the Fire Brigades Union will basically collate all their members that they feel are affected by it.
Oh, right.
They will then, on their behalf, kind of deal with that. So Fire Officers Association, on-call retained fire staff with their trade unions as well, they will basically put their names forward and sort of say these are the people who are affected, and then of course it'll be for the individual members to say, well, kind of hold on a minute, I was affected more in this way, and they will then have to demonstrate we've got that. We won't get involved really. We'll do a big data exercise, I suspect, about was this person actually a scheme member at the time?
Right.
Were they in this union or that union? So they'll get some confirmations, and that's the burden locally. It's around the data collection and information that we'll have to provide.
All right, so that's not so bad then, because I imagine first reading this, you'd have an awful lot of time spent out of your time or the team's time to negotiate and all the rest of it. But if it's
No.
coming centrally, that's
No,
not so bad then.
That's right, so it'll be
Yeah.
dealt with nationally. I mean, we've probably got 2 or 3 posts now that focus purely on pensions because of the discrimination issues. We've got 2 or 3 posts now, partly funded by government grant, of course.
Yeah.
That's now dealing with all this data to try and confirm, well, who gets paid what. And that's the other side, of course, is people have to make long-term decisions about when they're going to retire. Because they have to get the numbers back, which could take many, many months from the pension administrator to get the numbers back.
Yeah, it's a bit of a nightmare, isn't it? But
Yes, it's been a very interesting 10 years, I have to say.
thank you for that.
Thank you, Richard. Nigel?
We're talking about a pension scheme, and if I'm being totally honest, I've got no idea what it involves. So, can you give me a quick resume of the sort of a quick one? Is it a final salary scheme, or is it?
Defined benefit, defined contribution, all those kind of sort of things. So
Yes, yeah.
if you're in the 1992 scheme, so which I would have started in, it was a final salary scheme. Everybody will have moved to a career average scheme as of
Right.
there was protected people, so people before a period of time would have been completely protected, so they were relatively close to retirement and of a certain age. They would have got complete protections in it. There was then a period of people who were in a tapered period, so if you was in this bracket, you would stay in the scheme until you transition at this point. So I transitioned in 2018 to the 2015 scheme. Then there's the people with, then you'll move into your career average, so whatever your career average is for your contributions. And then it's tiered as well, so higher earners in terms of like principal officers will pay something like 14.5% of salary, and if you're sort of like far, you'll be paying a lower percentage of salary, and it's based on career average as it is now. So everybody from April of last year, regardless of tapering or protections, would have been transferred. It was an agreed period of April last year, everybody been in the 2015 scheme, which every now active member will be in.
Right.
So that's about as straightforward. And I think there's currently about 6 different variations of the firefighters pension scheme: modified scheme, 92 scheme, 2006, 2015 scheme. So it's not just LGPS. It is a very, very, for considering the small size of the sector,
Yeah.
it is an incredibly complex pension. I hope that helps,
I
Councillor.
used to work in
And
the industry.
hopefully all that was accurate as well, off the top of my head.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Craig. Okay. Our recommendation, unless there are any other comments or questions, is that members take note of the activity of the pension board and pension scheme manager, along with the update of the current pension issues. So I'll move the recommendation. Do you want to second that?
Second.
That recommendation agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah, they agree.
Yeah.
Thank you, colleagues. Item 5 then is exclusion of the public. So to consider excluding the public from the meeting during the consideration of the remaining items in accordance with section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 under Schedule 12A Part 1 paragraph 3 on the basis that, having regard to all the circumstances, the public interest in maintaining an exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So I'll move the recommendation. Do you have to second that recommendation?
Second. Yes.